Paul here from My Perfect Failure, helping you turn your failures into successes and your setbacks into opportunities. What if the very thing we've been taught to fear or fix was actually a superpower in disguise? Today's guest is Dr Recca Troy, founder of Retrain The Dyslexic Brain, a groundbreaking initiative that helps children not just manage but thrive with dyslexia. And she's working with people like Sir Richard Branson to change how the world sees this condition. Rebeca reveals how undiagnosed dyslexia has too often led to school dropouts, anxiety, and depression. We discuss why this no longer needs to be the case. She shares how her neuroscience-backed programs empower children and families through daily practice, mindset coaching, and the science of neuroplasticity. Plus, we discuss her collaboration with Sir Richard Branson and the non-profit Made by Dyslexia, and how dyslexic thinking might just be the future of innovation. So, if you're ready to learn how understanding the dyslexic brain can unlock untapped potential, listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today I am super excited because I have another amazing guest for you. So joining us today, we have a mother of two and an expert in educational neuroscience, specializing in dyslexia treatments. She holds a doctorate in education, is a leading researcher in neuroscience and reading disabilities, and a nationally certified teacher in early and middle literacy. Known for her tenacious, nurturing approach, she brings advanced dyslexia interventions into homes, making them accessible and practical for families. Recognized by 10 plus publications, including Psychology Today, Women's Journal, and is it Voyage NY? Is that one of them as well? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. And a lot more. Recent work includes Psychology Today, TV segments, and a project with Sir Richard Branson. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Dr. Recca Troy. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So excited to have this conversation with you about dyslexia, because I know nothing about. We did have a little conversation previously, and so I'm fascinated by dyslexia, your work on dyslexia, because I know that you've got a very specific approach where you're helping, I guess, children, but not just children, you're helping their families as well, which I think is, they are impacted with it as well, but we tend to forget about not just the sufferers of dyslexia, but their families as well. So definitely keen to delve into that with you as well. What I'm always keen to understand, particularly when you've got people like yourself that are experts in their respective fields, about how they got into it. So psychology, dyslexia, what was your journey into this space?
I think in a lot of ways, dyslexia chose me. So I grew up in a family where everybody, maybe not everybody, but many, many people, my brother, certainly one, if not both of my parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins were dyslexic. And I think, back when I was growing up, it wasn't as popular to know about it or to talk about it. And so for many, it was undiagnosed. And so I was the one person kind of in that group that didn't have it. And then my journey led me into the classroom, and I was working with high school students and I was their literature teacher, and it was expected that I was teaching the children literature. And I was amazed, absolutely amazed at how many children came into my classroom without the ability to read as a teenager. And so it was not a part of my training at all to talk about dyslexia, to learn about what it was, to support kids at that age or at that level with reading. And so it really kind of led me to, well, I wonder what could be done about this, or maybe I need to dive more into that. And so it really ignited a passion and an interest in the topic. And then I think, as fate would have it, when I went to graduate school, I happened to be put under one of the first people to do neuroscience and reading disability studies. And so, obviously she piqued my interest. She was a huge influence on my life, and, learning from her and her methods, and, a lot of the best in what we know about science and reading together. And so, I think ever since then, it's grown exponentially, but it really started with my personal experience and my family.
It sounds, though, if you kind of connect the dots, it almost feels like you were fated, almost like you were chosen to actually look into dyslexia, because the connection with your family, and then school, and then I think you mentioned, I guess, this lady that came into your life as well. So does that feel like that to you, like you were fated to really lean into this and this research?
It does, because throughout my journey, I've continued to be put in front of or put in touch with many, many people who have helped this to grow exponentially. And I feel like there's a bigger mission that's beyond me that I get to be a part of. Something else that I did not mention that I think has been really important for me is dyslexia is hereditary. And so highly likely that my own children would be dyslexic. And it turns out that, one of them is. And so it's been really powerful to have the tools and to experience that firsthand, because I often think about what the mothers that we often serve must feel like, knowing that there is this issue and they're really struggling with their brain to put sight and sound together, but they don't know how to help. And so I've felt grateful many times that I know exactly what to do, and I've been able to support my kiddo in being at the top of her class. Okay. So it's powerful in that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that clarity around it being hereditary. I didn't know that. And that probably, I hope I would have asked that question at some point. But thanks for that clarity. So going back to when you, I guess, were a child and it became apparent that members of your family had dyslexia, was it diagnosed as dyslexia at that point? How did you end up discovering that these guys had dyslexia?
So I think what's really interesting, and this is, I think, becoming a trend of people my age that are now recently learning that they have ADHD, or maybe they have other conditions that just weren't talked about or they weren't diagnosed. And so none of these people were diagnosed at the time. But in learning a ton about the traits and the signs and the symptoms of what dyslexia looks like, I was like, oh, ding, ding, ding. Yep, I've seen that in real time. Yes, I know exactly who those people are. And I've seen all of the evidence that would lead to that. And so, for some people, a diagnosis doesn't matter, and it's not important at all. And for other people, it's really powerful to get the clarity on, exactly why things are the way that they are, or why something might have been challenging. So, yeah, to your point, no, there wasn't an official diagnosis. That wasn't even something that people talked about in the area where we live.
Okay. And in hindsight, knowing what you know about dyslexia, is it quite clear that they had dyslexia?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this is a question that I'm sure people listening to this or watching will probably want to know exactly what dyslexia is.
Yeah. So it's a neurological difference in how the brain processes language. And so, if we were to have two people side by side, their eyes at rest, we wouldn't notice that there would be a major difference. But if we asked those same two people to read a sentence and we watched what was happening in the brain, what we would notice is that there's an entire area in the back of the brain that's called the occipital lobe, where our vision is controlled, that wouldn't be activated. And there's an entire area over here in the parietal temporal lobe of the brain where a lot of our auditory functioning and our processing of language and how we're hearing sounds is located. And that also is far less active. And so that neurological difference just during language tasks makes it difficult for a kiddo to spell something. So they might add in letters that don't belong there, or they might omit letters that should have been there, or maybe even an entire syllable is missing. Or it might mean that I'm reversing a letter, or I'm reversing a number, or it might mean that I'm trying to decode through a word. But because what I see and what I hear aren't really neurologically connected together, I might work really hard to decode the word cat, see it again 3 lines later, and it's like I've started all over. It's amnesia because my brain isn't processing that letter and that sound go together. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things really do have an impact on overall life quality, on literacy, on schooling, certainly. And so it's just that neurological difference as it pertains to language.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I'm going to put a link. I watched one of your videos, I think yesterday, and you've got a really good. I'll put the link to the video in the show notes. But you've got a very good graphic which shows the difference between what we would describe as a normal, brain compared to somebody that's suffering with dyslexia, where you'll see it provides a lovely visual where what you've said, you actually can see in real time. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I think the other piece that I didn't mention that I think is worth mentioning is that there are significant gifts that come with that diagnosis as well. So, we're learning a ton all of the time. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what we really know about how gifted that brain really is. But there's some areas in the prefrontal cortex that are also activated. So spatial awareness, creativity, lateral thinking, those things we know are enhanced with a person with dyslexia. So I think oftentimes these are really, really gifted people that have an unexpected delay or a difference when it comes to language.
Okay. I'm glad you said that because it's reminded me of something. I was reading something this week. I think it's a book by a guy called Jay Samit, which I think it's called Disrupted. But anyway, he talks about dyslexia. I believe talks about dyslexia. He's not an expert in dyslexia, I read something by somebody that talks about dyslexia, and or somebody observed that people with dyslexia have, an increased ability in terms of resilience and solving problems. They just tend to be more capable than people that don't have dyslexia about solving problems. So to your point, it needn't hold us back.
Exactly right. And so, I think coupling the work that we do, which is to help the brain to actually connect those things together and get the visual and auditory system to work in tandem. And you already have all of these amazing gifts and you have an incredible superpower in your brain. Imagine what's possible.
Yeah. And just if David watches this, actually, I think I remember him more. He's actually dyslexic. So I'm sure he's actually dyslexic. So he had challenges at school, but years ago, similar to your experience with your family, probably wasn't diagnosed. So school was a challenge.
Absolutely.
And what I was thinking as well around this, and I guess this is one of the reasons you're helping, bring more clarity and bring more awareness to dyslexia, is it must be really confusing particularly for children and particularly for parents and even maybe for teachers who aren't qualified or don't have the education to actually pick up the signs when there might be a child they might deem is not as capable as the other children, or maybe they could, in extreme examples, maybe think, well, maybe they're a bit disruptive because they're not. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the the insights here. I don't know whether you might want to expand on that.
Absolutely. And you are 100% right on. So when you think about having a conversation with one of these children, incredibly talented, very intelligent, you would have a fantastic conversation, and then you'd ask them to spell something or write something or read something out loud, and it's like, this doesn't match. So oftentimes that can be misperceived as laziness. We've had many clients who have said, my kid is coming home in tears because their teacher is consistently saying, like, you just need to try harder. Why don't you try? And it's not that it's effort-based, it's that the brain literally cannot do those things. And so it has nothing to do with their interest or their effort in doing well. In fact, they're likely trying much harder than other children to try to accomplish the tasks. So, another really interesting and important study was called the Connecticut Longitudinal Study, but they went into a school and they asked the staff, please identify for us, how many of these children do you believe have dyslexia? And they described what it is. And they said, maybe about 3% of, we really don't have a lot of children like that here. And so then they were given permission to test every single kid in the school to see the prevalence, and they found that it was actually over 25% who had dyslexia. And so it is 1 in 5, and it's a lot more common than people realize. And so I think, increasing awareness, increasing the ability for people to know signs and symptoms, for families to know, for teachers to know, is a huge, something to work on that we as a society need improvement in, for sure.
Yeah, I can just think about when I was a child, when you're at school and you're learning a subject and it's not quite coming as easy as you want it to. And if you've got dyslexia and it's just not picked up, and you've got maybe your parents, because parents won't, unless they are a doctor of dyslexia like you, or neuroscience, or it's been in their family, they're going to be they're just going to be ignorant to actually what the symptoms are. And you can get angry with your children. You can think, well, they're not paying attention at school. They might even be punished. You're not going out. You're not going to that party at the weekend because you haven't performed well in an English test or something. And I guess from the child's perspective, if their brain works in a certain way, which is in line with dyslexia, for them it's like, well, I have put the effort in. I am trying to read this. And I guess some of the people that you've come into contact with, I'm sure you probably hear these stories.
Incredible amounts of those stories. And so, the Mayo Clinic and others have done studies to actually say that the likelihood of depression or of anxiety or of dropping out of school, there's even relationships to teen pregnancy that go along with an undiagnosed, the lack of a diagnosis, I guess I should say, because oftentimes you start to write the story that, well, I'm just stupid.
Yeah.
And I don't have the capacity to learn. I don't know what this is, but obviously I must be dumb because every piece of evidence that I'm seeing in front of me, like I'm going around collecting it and I've got a whole bunch of it, I might as well just drop out of school. And so that doesn't happen for everybody. Certainly there are many people who have successfully made it through, but there is quite a bit of evidence to say that undiagnosed, it can lead to some pretty negative outcomes.
And there is a long list. I should have actually written down a list, but there is a long list of famous people, I guess noted people, that suffer from dyslexia that perform really well. So to your point about creativity, Richard Branson, I know who you work with, which I'm going to ask about in a second. He's, I guess, a shining light for that.
Absolutely. And, I think he would tell you himself that school was miserable for him. And I think that is something that some people have the resilience to overcome, or maybe they have an amazing support structure. I believe that he's spoken very positively about his family and how supportive that they were of the fact that school wasn't going very well and all of those things. And other people may not have those same opportunities or relationships to kind of help them to overcome what might have been really challenging. So I think that there are many, many people who have been wildly successful without a diagnosis, without support. But the likelihood of that happening time and time again is just far less.
It's unlikely. And I didn't realise it was that the stat you kindly provided, that 1 in 5 of us potentially will have dyslexia. I had no idea it was as high as that. So that's definitely a stat that we should definitely take on board. If there's people listening to this that have got children, or maybe if you could be a teacher, you could be your niece or nephew, it might be your children. Maybe that's something they can look at. And say hypothetically, you're a parent and you think, actually, this sounds familiar. How do you actually check? How do you test to see whether your child has dyslexia?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So there's a couple of different levels of that you can engage with. So if you want to get an official diagnosis, you're going to do a neuropsychological evaluation where you find out what your child's IQ is, you find out, how their reading or language performance is relative to that. And if there's enough of a discrepancy there, that's where the diagnosis comes from. And so, sometimes depending on where you go to get that diagnosis, they might be looking for other things too. Could there be ADHD that's co-occurring? Could we have working memory struggles? Any of those things. But that is often done through a pediatrician or a healthcare practitioner. But you don't need to go to that level to screen. So, I would say that if we were looking for an official piece of paper or a document with a diagnosis, it's that neuropsych evaluation. But if I want to just get a feel for, is this really a thing, or am I just overthinking this as a parent? A dyslexia screener is a fantastic place to go. So you're looking for behaviors in your child, like, we really struggled to learn the alphabet. Or maybe I'm starting to learn to read, and it's very obvious that that's very difficult for me. So, 3-letter words that might be more easy for most kids. I'm doing the thing where I struggle to figure out what those words are, and then I see them again 2 lines later, and it's like I've never learned that before, and I don't know what that word is. And then I'm on the next page, and I definitely don't know what that word is, even though I just saw it. So those can be red flags. If I'm struggling to spell, and again, I'm adding letters in that don't belong, or I'm omitting letters that should have been there, or maybe even an entire syllable is missing, it's a red flag. If I have working memory struggles where it seems like, I'm giving you multiple things to remember, and anything past 5 is like, I really can't tell you what you told me. Go pick up the laundry, put your socks in the hamper. I've given you 4 or 5 things, and I really can't remember those. That can also be a sign of some struggle. Any of those early literacy type things, rhyming even, like what rhymes with cat? Dog,
Yeah.
no, but it's that connection with the brain's ability to hear the sounds at the same time that they can visually picture that. And so the disconnect there is what causes that to feel really, really hard.
Okay. And so you're based in the States. I'm in the UK, and it'd probably be slightly different who we go to see. But would it be mentioned a pediatrician, or would you go to see your GP, your local GP or somebody, and they would refer you?
Yes, that's correct. So, I think it would be helpful if you let them know that you're seeing some things that are causing you concern. And, I'd like to find out more information. Would you be willing to refer me for some additional testing? And, there are places in the US, and I think the UK could have some too, that are starting to make it mandatory that the school is screening for dyslexia. It's certainly not all places here, but there are some states that have now required by law that in the early years of schooling that we are testing every single year, every single child, to see whether or not this is an issue, because we know that early intervention is best because of all of the psychological reasons and everything else that goes along with that. So depending on where you are, you might actually be able to find some of that testing in your child's school.
And that's encouraging. That's really encouraging. Can you think today in 2025 that should be pretty mandatory? Because particularly when you think about kids and we want to make sure rightly that they're well and healthy, and that should be part of a mandatory check, because if we need help in any way, whether it be physical, or whether it be speech, or whether it would be covered there. Yeah, so that would be. And with dyslexia, are we born with it, or can it happen at a later date?
Yes, so it can actually be both. Most cases, I would say, are hereditary. So there have been studies to find that, like in the 16th week of gestation, there's a gene that changes, and so they've actually done enough study to find out specifically where it comes from. But up to 50 to 80% of cases are heritable. So if somebody in your family has it, there is a greater chance that you also will have someone else that has it. So that's something to know and look for. But there are situations, whether it's environmental toxins or it's poor literacy environments, that can cause the brain to function in the same way, because the brain was never developed for language. We don't come out with that ability. We have to actually be taught language, and we have to engage with people in order to learn where words come from. And, they've seen plenty of examples of kids who have been neglected or abused, and they really didn't have any of that interaction, that have far less language development than others. So there can be environmental situations that would cause us to be, our brains to perform in that same way.
Okay. So something that I read, you kind of mentioned a little bit, but I read something that you wrote, that dyslexia doesn't necessarily happen in a vacuum. There can be additional challenges that we might have. And I think you've mentioned one, ADHD, it could be autistic, there could be a number of different things going on. I don't know whether you want to maybe speak on that, because that was something that hadn't occurred to me before.
Yeah, so, I think there can be cases where dyslexia is the only thing that's going on, but there are other co-occurring issues that are often present. So ADHD is one of them. So you're actually far more likely to have dyslexia if you have ADHD than to have ADHD if you have dyslexia. It doesn't go both ways, but that is one that we see a lot. Working memory struggles. So the ability to hold information in this very short term and then leave it. But I have the ability to hold information and work with it. That often is a struggle that goes along with that working memory or that phonological memory. Sometimes they co-occur. But there can be other things that happen. So you can have autism and dyslexia. You can have Asperger's and dyslexia. There can be any number of other things that also go along with it that further complicate the support that is provided and or given.
Yeah. So in those instances, clearly parents, the school system are going to need support. And I want to get into Retrain the Dyslexic Brain in a second, your company, but just around the school system, what you're seeing in the school system today. Are you seeing has it developed at all in terms of their ability to detect dyslexia and to maybe treat it, and maybe kids not being isolated in that then it's not picked up, or maybe even if it is picked up, simply there just isn't the expertise within the school system to really help these children?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of complications there. I will certainly say that there's an effort to make it better. And a couple of years ago, it wasn't that long ago, there were actually curriculums that encouraged the memorization of words. And so, we know from science that is not the best way to teach reading. And so, at least in the United States, there is a big push away from those types of curriculums. We know that is not what best instruction looks like. And so a number of different states in the US have said, you must use science of reading based curriculums. It has to be backed in what we know is good reading instruction from actual scientific research. And we can't use any of these other methodologies anymore. And so I think that there's a movement to try and help people to understand how to teach reading methodologies better. But unfortunately, the statistic is around 40% of schools are still using those curriculums. And so, the likelihood of a child being in a classroom that isn't even providing good quality reading instruction is pretty high still. I think that a lot of places are trying to implement, as I was mentioning, that early screening protocol to try to get some information on how the child might be performing so that, a parent who may not know anything about this could at least have a red flag to say, oh gosh, the school told me that we're not progressing in reading. I didn't even know. I think that happens in some places, but again, a long way to go in terms of universal screening for all kids.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, really, when you think about it, particularly when it's undiagnosed and there just isn't the education in the parents or maybe even a school, and you've just got a child that is just left struggling, and we get that perception, don't we, when children aren't progressing at the rate that we want them to. You kind of get labelled, and clearly, it's always unfair to label anybody, but particularly when you think about kids that might be suffering from dyslexia, but it's just not been picked up.
Yeah, I definitely think that in addition, one of the other things that you mentioned is, even if it was picked up, the likelihood that you had an intervention or a support structure that was going to fit your specific needs and actually move the needle is a whole other complication and problem.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah. Okay, so there's good news. The good news is Retrain the Dyslexic Brain, which is your business where you're helping young specifically with dyslexia, reading, etc. So it'd be lovely to get an idea about how it came about and how you're engaging with actually not just the children, but also their families.
Absolutely. So, it came out of the exact conversation that we just had, which is there's such a significant need. And so I was working at a university training reading specialists, helping them to understand how best to assess, how best to instruct, and, support children in actually making these neurological changes so that their brain could bring sight and sound back together. But, in having my own children and wanting to not only be more flexible in my time to be able to be with them, it allowed me to think differently about how I could maybe take this skill and provide it to families who don't have it. And so, we started with just the US to say, okay, if you know that you are in an area where there is no testing or there is no intervention or what you've been doing isn't working, and you need something else, we've got the ability to bring that access right into your home. So you can be in rural areas of the world and you can still, log into our virtual course and can get coaching from me, from our mindset coaches. All of that is possible from anywhere in the world. And so we have expanded. We do have clients in the EU, we've got clients in Australia, we've got one client in Africa, but we've been able to really kind of bring this to a more global stage because the accessibility and the support, unfortunately, is not as prevalent as it should be. And so we've been able to really give families tools to completely shift the trajectory of their child's life.
Amazing. So it's an online experience, which is wonderful because that means you can touch all these different parts of the world that you just described. And is it course? Is it interactive? Are there tools which they can readily access to actually so they can pretty much do it daily basis as soon as they understand what they're doing?
Yeah. So, a big part of what we do is based in neuroscience. And so along with that comes repetition. And so it is really powerful to be able to give the parents the tools like, look, this is what you need to do for 10 to 15 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. And so the parent learns that through a very short learning module that they do themselves. And then they're working with the child. So nobody is the child isn't on the computer at all. They're just working with their parent for 10 to 15 minutes a day, doing these things repetitively until the brain has what we would call a reflexivity to that. So we don't have to think really hard about it. It just responds in the way that we would want it to. And so for some children, that can happen within a few days. For some children, that happens within a few weeks. But we find that within support of this nature, that's consistently 10 to 15 minutes within 4 months, we can completely shift how the child's brain is functioning.
Really? Wow, that's quick. So potentially in 4 months you'll see a difference.
Oh my goodness, massively. So like when we look at we're super proud of the statistics.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So our average client makes 50 percentile points of growth from pre to post in 4 months. So, if a child was functioning at the 5th percentile, I mean, we had a child last week who ended at the 72nd percentile in that time frame. So when we look at, what's possible, I went from feeling really crummy about myself. I wasn't able to get my brain to hear these sounds, respond to these sounds. Reading was terrible, writing was terrible, spelling was miserable. I felt awful, to actually, I can perform just as well, if not better, than a lot of the kids in my class. So, I mean, when we think about that from an emotional standpoint, a psychological standpoint, and a skill perspective, I mean, it completely changes the way that they function in life.
Staggering. So I was just thinking, so Elon Musk, he's dyslexic, isn't he? Elon Musk.
Yes, I believe so.
I was just thinking, imagine how much more money he would have if he was one of your kids back in the day.
I mean, I think it's incredible because, right, we've talked about this where it's often average or above average intelligence profile in addition to this unexpected delay. So that unexpected delay in language can cause avoidance of learning. It can cause any number of unwanted things that cause you to not maybe achieve your highest potential. And so we're about getting kids to live their best life and achieve what they really are here to achieve. Why not give them all the tools that they could possibly need?
Phenomenal. Your result, I hadn't realized. I knew that your children were performing well, but it's pretty staggering the rate of growth and the rate of improvement that you're seeing. So you guys clearly must be incredibly proud of the work that you're doing, not just for the children, but also their parents as well, because it must be incredibly reassuring to the parents, but also I imagine for them as well that they're learning a lot about dyslexia, the challenges that dyslexia has, how potentially it's impacted their children, and also, sure, it's probably helped with bonding as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking of an email that we received yesterday. So a mom sent me a message. She had been in our program about a year ago, and she said, I just have to tell you that my son came home from school yesterday, and he said, everything about this year is easier. I can actually read the directions. I can actually participate in school. And she said, it's like 360 or maybe 180 degrees out where he's focused in his learning. He's doing all of his homework. I mean, it's just massively changed the environment at home, their interactions, because before that, I mean, she was constantly battling him every single day. Do your homework, do your homework. She didn't want him to fail, but he couldn't. And so, that battle that ensues between parents and kids, or kids and themselves, or even siblings, oftentimes there's rivalry when a younger sibling who's neurotypical outperforms the older sibling. That can cause major conflict within a family. And so, I think it's definitely not just the child with dyslexia that struggles. It's that whole family system, the emotions, the meltdowns, the trips to school for conflict, those types of things that have the ability to really evaporate because of the complete shift in performance.
Yeah, I can imagine. You don't think about all those dynamics. If you've got a child that's maybe older, they've got dyslexia, but they're not picking things up because they've got dyslexia, but it's not diagnosed. And you've got a child that's younger who doesn't have it, who's able to learn normally, what I guess whatever normal looks like. So you don't think about the dynamic. Well, I guess you can think about the dynamics, but it's something that if it's not our family, then you just don't consider how that will impact the family.
It does, absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways, that's when sometimes people discover that there is something going on. Like, hold on a second, this was my first child. I didn't know any better. I thought that this is maybe what it looked like. I mean, I knew that we were maybe behind in reading, but I had no idea it was this far behind until I had this other child that happened later, and they didn't have any of those struggles. And now I can see the difference in how much of a struggle it is for this other child. And so I think there certainly are complications that come along with dyslexia, whether it could be I feel really angry and frustrated, or I could start to feel more depressed and withdrawn, like I don't really want to participate in school as much because I don't feel like I belong here, or it can be really anxious. We've had a lot of kids who, start reporting tummy aches, and they are, nervous and pulling out hairs on their arms. I mean, it can get really intense with, having the daily struggle every single day. I'm having to go to school and I feel unsuccessful, and there's really nothing that's changing in my environment. And so it's just causing all of this havoc. And so, I agree that anything that we can do to help kids get the support as early as possible can really evaporate some of those later struggles that we might have otherwise.
Right. It's pretty, to me, it sounds heaven sent. It really does. It really does sound really important for everybody, the whole family dynamic. So if somebody's listening to this now and thinking, actually, I do have a suspicion that my daughter, my son, my nephew, or somebody in their family, a youngster in their family, has dyslexia, how will they go about contacting you and engaging you? What's that process like?
Yeah, so my best recommendation would be to go to our website, which is drrebecatroy.com. And actually at the top, we have a screener that you can access.
Oh, brilliant.
So very, very accessible. You can do that within about 20 minutes at home. And without having to go through the full neuropsych evaluation, you can find out, like, is this even something that I should be concerned about? It's going to give you data to say, all right, my child is falling at like the 15th percentile for reading, and maybe they're at the 5th percentile for spelling and phonological awareness. Boy, that's only at the 2nd percentile. So because I've got these 3 data points that are telling me that something might be off, you can start to get a window into whether or not that's an issue. And we offer you an opportunity to speak with somebody on our team, complimentary, to just ask questions about the results. And so I would definitely recommend that you go there. It's just right up at the top of the site, and to click on that screener and start the process of finding out if that's truly an issue.
Okay, well, I'll put a link to that on the show notes, so it's very easy for people to access that. There's a word which I know you will be able to explain for me: neuroplasticity. So is that part of what's going on where you're seeing the children improve in terms of their ability to understand language and read and write?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think in terms of science, we've evolved a lot in how we understand how the brain works. And there's still a ton that we don't know that I think we're on the frontier of now. But like we once upon a time thought that the world was flat, and, there's a misunderstanding of that whole thing. We also thought that the brain is fixed, and it is not. So our brain is dynamic. It changes throughout the course of our life, even into adulthood. There are many things that we can do to change, augment, damage our brain, in terms of, whether we're ingesting foods or alcohol or things that we know have a physiological response to how the brain is, or there are ways that we can enhance it. I mean, many studies have shown that if you're doing meditation for anywhere between 8 to 15 minutes a day, you can actually see a cognitive restructuring. So it's similar to that in knowing that we are positive that we can change how the brain functions if we are doing things consistently, the right things, with repetition. And so it's giving those tools, like what we're about is giving those tools to families. So I don't have to know anything about neuroscience. I don't have to know anything about dyslexia. I just have to be a caring parent that's willing to follow the direction and do these things with my child for 10 to 15 minutes. And you can really see the massive impact that has in how the brain starts to reorganize itself and change how it's functioning.
Yeah, that's incredibly encouraging, that knowing the right, well, you guys provide the right tools, the right techniques, the right exercises, and literally 15 minutes per day, just repetition, consistency, and everybody's going to see the results. The school as well, and the teachers. Something that, again, that I read that you wrote, you talk about mindset. How important is it for, I guess, everybody, I guess the children and the parents, to have the right type of mindset so they can do all the exercises and all the things that they need to do to see the improvements?
Yeah, great question. So I think with anything, we can self-sabotage. So we actually have seen clients who have the ability to read, but they still believe that they can't, or they still believe that they're not good enough. And so they're less likely to want to engage in those activities, even though they're now able to. So I think having the mindset built alongside of the skill set is really, really important, such that we have actually embedded mindset coaches into our program. So when clients come in, they do have a mindset coach that's assigned to the family, and they help them to work through those challenges and helping the child to develop a growth mindset. I might not be able to do this right now or yet, but I will. My effort equals my success. And so, that goes so far beyond what we're doing in the program.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, it really is helping them to build this confidence and independence. Because if I had to pick two words that all of our families have said to us over and over again when we first meet, just like, what do you really want for your child? I want them to feel confident. I want them to be independent. I want them to go out and conquer the world and do whatever it is that they want to do. But we have to develop their belief in themselves and their belief in their capacity. So we work really hard to build that alongside of the skill set for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were talking that having the addition of the mindset aspect, the mindset coach, that's just going to impact every aspect of their schooling, just every discipline, not just schooling, outside schooling, when you're doing even in the home, when your parents ask you to do something, or you're at a club and you're having to do something as a child. And if you've got that growth mindset, because it's been embedded in part of your learning, it just transcends beyond what they come to you initially for.
100%. I mean, going back to that email that we just got yesterday, she said that, part of his major changes was not only his ability to read and participate in the schooling, but his attitude toward learning, toward doing homework, toward all of his assignments, that type of thing. I mean, I think it came from the grit and the perseverance that he developed from having to face hard things. I mean, none of the clients that come in are, saying like reading is so easy for me or spelling is so easy for me. So they're having to consistently face something that they believe to be really hard. And some kids have actually gone through significant trauma related to reading before they start. And so they've got some things to overcome there, but it really makes a massive difference to support them in believing in their capacity through hard work.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how rewarding it must be for you and your team.
It is.
When you get these youngsters, they come in and you just see them go from really, I guess, frustrated, maybe unhappy, maybe feeling slightly embarrassed that the school has viewed them, or maybe their parents view them as not been able to learn as ably as other people. But then you work with them over a 4-month period, 6-month period, and then you're seeing dramatic improvements.
Yeah, I mean, we're truly hoping to change a life.
Yeah, I think you're changing lives, because it's the ripple effect of everybody else that's impacted as well. And just a quick question: so a child comes in, and they work with you and your coaches. 4 months, 6 months later, generally you're seeing these wonderful improvements. After that period, do you have any more engagement with them? Do you need to?
You don't need to. We do have a number of clients who were able to catch it early. And so they were able to end the program and they're completely on track with their classmates and they can continue to grow and they don't need our services or our support any longer. And that's okay. And then we have other clients who maybe didn't find out about this as quickly and they're able to make these massive improvements, but they maybe don't have support at their school, or maybe some of the essays or the assignments or things that they're being expected to do right now, there's still a little bit of a gap there. So we have a Prosper program that some clients can continue in, and we have a lot of them that honestly stay for the community.
Yeah.
So before, they had been previously on an island feeling very frustrated, very isolated as a parent of a child with dyslexia. And then they enter this community with a whole bunch of people who are doing amazing things for their children and they all believe in their capacity. Like, I don't want to leave this community.
Yeah,
like I want to stay. So we do have a lot of families that choose to do that as well. But it's not needed, especially if the child is cut early and you're completely caught up to grade level by the time you leave.
And it's reassuring though that you do have a community.
We do.
And you actually can, you can stick around and you can, because I guess there might be different things that crop up that if you're not in the community, you want them to have that fluency of being in a community where any little things crop up, actually, it's easily remedied because I'm still in the community.
Yes. And, we still provide additional mindset support. And a big part of that is actually an identity. So once you've actually gotten yourself off of the life raft that you felt like you needed, and you are firmly on top of that thing, now we're reaching for something else. So how do we talk about putting you above average in everything?
Yeah.
And how do we talk about taking some of your superpowers and really growing into that in a whole new level? So it's really kind of there's a huge piece of identity that we work with the families on in that program as well.
No, it sounds massive. It sounds amazing. I mentioned Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson, and you worked on a project with him. Can I ask you about that?
Yes. So, what I think is so incredible about him is that he has very vocally talked about his struggles with dyslexia, and he actually credits dyslexia for a lot of his success. So he'll very openly say, it was a gift to me to have this because it's caused me to think more creatively. It's caused me to be more interpersonal with the people that I'm around. And, so he'll talk openly about that. But he has done a partnership with Made by Dyslexia. It's a nonprofit that is actually in the UK. And so their big mission is to put dyslexic thinking and the gifts of that really on the map.
Okay.
And so he has, done a lot of supporting work. And, there was a group of us that met in New York City this fall to unveil the Dyslexic Thinking University. And so it's an online learning platform where people can go to learn about dyslexic thinking. What are the benefits of that? Why would you want to have those kind of thinkers in your workplace? Why would you have those kind of thinkers in your school? How can you help them to grow, et cetera? And so, I was very grateful to be a part of that team that got to unveil that.
That sounds amazing because it's acknowledging dyslexia, but not removing the superpowers that exist for people that do have dyslexia. And Richard Branson is a shining example of that.
Yeah, an incredible human being. And so, I think there's been tremendous work by that group to continue this message that dyslexic thinking is a gift, and we need the world to know more about that.
Okay, fabulous. So, yes, I definitely encourage anybody that thinks that dyslexia might be in their family with a child or anybody that they know, could be a work colleague, to actually get in touch with you. And I'll put links in the show notes. But where is the best place for people to find out more about Retrain the Dyslexic Brain and maybe contact yourself?
Yeah, you got it. So everything that we have in terms of our ecosystem, you can still find from that drRebeccaTroy.com site. But, we've got a free 45-minute webinar that talks about the 5 simple steps that you need to shift in order to get your child's brain hearing and responding differently to language. You can certainly access that. We've got all kinds of YouTube videos where we've interviewed families, where we've, talked about each case study. So something that we do is that every other week we celebrate one of our graduates and we go through all of their data and what happened before and what happened afterwards, and we tell their story. And so I do think that you could likely find yourself in one of those kids. Or, as you're listening along about this mother describe her experience, it's highly likely that you could say, oh, that's exactly like, my son or my daughter. And so I think just listening to and hearing from a lot of those families as they share their personal journey can be a very, very insightful place to start. But the links to all of our social accounts and the videos on how to know and how to test and the screener and all of that is available there on this.
Okay. Can I ask one question, not about children, but about adults? So if there are adults, I'm sure there are adults out there that potentially, maybe they've just gone through their entire adolescent life, early years life, haven't been diagnosed. Do you have any advice for them? Are they people you can contact or can contact you, or if not, do you have advice for them?
Yes, and they're actually people we can help. And so the difference would be that in working with a child, you are fairly certain that they're going to have an adult that's living with them that would be committed to doing this 10 to 15 minute a day process. And so if you are an adult that is interested in kind of reorganizing how your brain is processing language, you absolutely can be a client and you can work with us in the program, but you would need to have a partner, somebody that ideally would maybe be in your home that could work with you 10 to 15 minutes a day, because as I mentioned, that plasticity piece and the repetition is really important.
Okay. Or maybe even if you're at work, if you had a work colleague that would be happy to, would that be okay as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really a short duration. We're talking about 10 to 15 minutes a day, but it's just kind of ensuring that there's continuity and like who would be working with you and, whether or not they would be coachable throughout that process.
Okay.
We would want to work with them to help them out.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I've got a recurring question. The recurring question is, if you could invite 3 inspirational people for dinner, they could be alive or past, who might you invite?
Yeah, I love this. And I really had to think a lot about I would invite. But my people all had very philanthropic mindsets, big picture thinkers, world shakers. So I actually picked Richard Branson as one of my people. I picked Oprah, and I also picked Fifi Lee. So I don't know if you know her, but she's a computer scientist and an expert in AI, but she co-founded AI for All, which is aimed at increasing diversity and inclusion through AI education. So maybe some underserved populations and how they could be pioneers in the world of AI. So I chose them because I thought, oh boy, if you could put all of these people who clearly have a heart-centered mission in everything that they do, and you could have a conversation about what could be possible if, for children with dyslexia, for families, I would think that could be such a powerful, life-giving conversation to have toward this mission.
Is Fifi Lee still with us, is she?
Yes, all of these people are still with us.
Okay, that would be an amazing dinner. And, out of that, I'm fairly certain out of that dinner, it'd be lots of laughs and whatnot, and you lots of wonderful conversation. But out of that dinner, I'm sure there would be an idea. We need to revisit this. Not we will revisit this. So out of that, I would love that to happen. Maybe, honestly, I've got my fingers crossed. Maybe the gods
Yes.
are with us. We put it into the ether, and
Yes,
we'll
that's right.
see if that happens. So if it does happen, please let me know. That would be amazing.
Okay, yes.
Dr. Troy, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed our initial conversation. I was really, really curious about dyslexia and all the wonderful things that you're doing. And I've learned so much. And I'm hoping, and not just learned a lot, I've really been inspired as well, which is great. And I'm hoping that anybody that's listened to this or watching this that thinks that there might be a problem or a challenge with one of their children or somebody that they know that's got dyslexia, or maybe you just think they have, they can just easily go to your website, do the screening. If it comes up that they need to have a conversation, they can just easily have a conversation. It doesn't
Yes.
matter where you are in the world. It's easily
Yep.
done.
Yes, correct.
So thank you so much. And
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of My Perfect Failure. If you aren't watching on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button. It really does help us grow the channel. And your feedback is most welcome. So we're keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the feedback page on the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.